But no matter if we're talking about an early loss or a late loss, I've missed out on the same things as every other lost mom. I've missed a lifetime of getting to know two of my children. I've missed milestones and celebrations. I've missed the mundane moments that would have made up the majority of memories with the two babies who didn't come home with me. I don't know the details of anyone else's loss, nor can I say I know exactly how they were affected by it. The experiences of lost moms are never exactly the same. But I do know that there is no only in pregnancy loss, not in mine or anyone else's.
Welcome back to the No Fit Too Small podcast. My name is Jackie Selsky. I am the Director of Marketing and Communications here at No Fit Too Small. And I am joined today by Director of Family Support, Allie Moss. Hi, Allie.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be sharing the couch with you today. We've had a few recordings, so it's fun to get to partner on these conversations with you. So thanks again for being with me.
Yeah, it's lovely to bring people into our community that we feel like have been a part of our community. So I'm excited for today.
Yeah. And what a great introduction to our guest today. We are joined by Jenny Albers, well-known author, blogger, mama. We're going to have so much to learn from her today. And she's just a beautiful wordsmith. So I think that's going to be kind of the highlight. And we've got a surprise for families who've been in our groups towards the end of this episode. We've got a little sweet surprise for you guys. But Jenny, thank you so much for being with us today. We're so excited to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to talk with you both.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you located? How did you get into writing? Just tell us a little bit about yourself, your family.
Yeah, well, I live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I have a 13-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son, and my son is my rainbow baby. I started writing, I should have probably taken notes because it's been a while now. I think it was in 2017. So I really started writing because of my pregnancy losses and then my pregnancy after losses that I had gone through. I felt very compelled to speak to that experience, to reach out to other women and families who had experienced that. It was something that affected me profoundly and that I just was not aware of until it happened to me, as far as the impact of those experiences. So I'll start with my story, if
Yeah,
that's
we'd love
okay. And,
that.
and that's really
Yes.
where the writing started.
Yeah.
My first pregnancy was successful. It ended with my daughter, healthy baby, very textbook pregnancy, um, easy, joyful, all of the things that you think pregnancy should be or that you want it to be. And then my pregnancy after that, so my second pregnancy was about 2.5 years later, and that ended very early on in an ectopic pregnancy. And so I wasn't even quite 6 weeks pregnant at that time. Um, and it was very hard. I mean, I don't even want to say that I was just sad. I was depressed. I grieved that pregnancy. I was ready to have another baby. I had never experienced loss. I had heard of ectopic pregnancy in, like a TV show. I mean, it was very vague in my mind, just sort of something that I had heard but didn't know much about. And so that was surprising to me. But by all accounts, as far as doctor visits and healthcare and OBGYN, I was cleared to try again when I felt ready, um, without any complications, right? Or anything that I needed to do differently. And so it would have been about 9 months later, I became pregnant for the third time. And that pregnancy ended just after 20 weeks. So my water broke just prior to 18 weeks during that pregnancy. And the short term for that is PPROM. And so there was nothing that the doctors could do. There was like a very minor hope, like tiny, tiny, tiny hope that maybe the tear would repair itself, but I think that almost never happens. So there wasn't a lot of hope that it would be a successful pregnancy. but I continued to carry my baby until I delivered naturally. And so I delivered shortly after 20 weeks. And um, my doctor, when I say they, my doctor believed that my baby's heart had stopped maybe 1 to 2 days prior to that. So it was a stillbirth at 20 weeks, 3 days. And that, I think that really started the journey of speaking eventually. I felt very just indescribable grief, I think, over that experience, and also just very alone and surprised because I didn't know that you could lose a baby at 20 weeks, which sounds, I don't know if that sounds silly or naive.
No, not at
I
all.
knew that miscarriages happen and, was always kind of told, or at least had the idea in some way or another. I don't know how I had the idea, but that pregnancy was safe after that 12-week mark.
I
And
totally
so,
relate to that.
yeah,
I don't know
um,
where that came from, but I
I
did
don't
believe
either.
that
I
too.
don't.
And yeah.
No one told me that. Maybe it was the internet. I don't know.
Right.
So I had that idea in my mind. Although I will say that prior to my water breaking, something felt off, and I couldn't have named it. Just something felt wrong, and that was despite my prenatal appointments being great, and there was nothing that the doctor could see. Ultrasounds were good up to that point, and so I don't know if that was mother's intuition, but I was very surprised, but in some ways I wasn't, because I had just kind of felt like something was off. Anyways, fast forward then. So that would have been in January. And so for several months, my husband and I discussed next steps, or if there were going to be next steps, if we were going to try again. And after visiting with doctors and specialists, we did decide to try again. And I became pregnant about 9 months after that. And that pregnancy, so when I refer to my pregnancy after loss, I have had two pregnancies after loss, but when I refer to
Mhm.
pregnancy after loss, that's the one I'm referring to typically. Um, I will, like, long story short, it was a successful pregnancy. It ended with the birth of my son, who is 8 years old now. But it was a very long and stressful pregnancy that was filled with anxiety, filled with grief, filled with, I would even say, depression. Just carrying the grief from previous pregnancy losses into that pregnancy and not knowing what was going to happen was very hard. And even though I felt supported, and I know that friends and family cared and that they loved me and they loved my baby, it was still there's still sort of an expectation of me being just very happy and excited, and nothing could go wrong. Certainly this won't happen again. But that's not how I felt. I think that was the messages that were coming to me, but that's not how it was felt actually, or I felt, excuse me, actually being the person who was pregnant after those two losses. And so about a year after my son was born, um, well, let me back up. I will say that I had felt very strongly that I needed to do something with my story, specifically related to loss, not necessarily pregnancy after loss at that time. Reading other people's stories, reading books, reading blogs, being part of whatever groups on social media was so helpful to me when I was grieving, because I didn't know anybody in my real life who had experienced loss. And I couldn't really relate to even other moms kind of at that time, even though I had a child, I had a living child, I was actively parenting, I still felt very much like an outsider. And so being able to see myself in other people's stories during those really hard months of deep grief was very meaningful to me. And just, I felt very connected to other people in ways that I couldn't feel connected kind of in my real life. And so, kind of based on that, and just based on the depth of grief and the experience in itself, I really felt compelled to start speaking in some way about loss, not only to honor my baby and my own story, but to honor so many stories of loss that are out there, and so many women and families who feel like they don't have a voice to speak their stories and to grieve and to say their baby's name. I wanted to honor them and also connect with those people in the same way that I was able to connect with people. I say people online and through books and stories during my own season of grief. And that just naturally led to also writing about pregnancy after loss um, because that was a profound experience in itself.
Yeah.
And just as we have gone forward and have kind of gone through years, I think we're getting better at talking about grief and loss, which I'm so grateful for. And now I feel like maybe it's time to put a spotlight on pregnancy after loss. I feel like that is still very um, hidden, just a very hidden piece of pregnancy loss that we don't talk about and that we just assume everything's great once you become pregnant again.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about your book. I feel like I have so many questions from what you've shared with us already, and we can go back. But I think that's a good segue into kind of what you're feeling extra passionate about right now. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your book and what your hope is for the people that read it.
Yeah, so my book is titled Courageously Expecting. Focus on the courageous part, as I do believe that becoming pregnant after loss is an act of courage to hope again and to choose to love another child, even when you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So, my kind of the overarching message of my book is really to encourage moms who are pregnant after loss, but also to meet them where they're at, and also to meet them with empathy. And so, it's my hope is anyway is that it is not just a book of encouragement. Everything's great. Congratulations. You know, everything's going to work out this time, but to really dig a little deeper into my personal experience and how hard it was, and hope to normalize that experience for others who are also walking through pregnancy after loss and thinking one, maybe, why is this so hard? Or I didn't know this was going to be so hard, but also when they're getting those messages from other people
Mhm.
and what's being reflected back to them is that they should be really happy and excited and everything is rainbows and hearts when it's not. And so I hope it's a good balance of empathy, encouragement, and just understanding.
I think that's so important. Like you said, the people feel so misunderstood in that because, like you said, everybody, I know we touched about this in another blog post, but everybody's so excited when you're pregnant, right? Like it just oozes, it never stops. And yet you might not feel that way. And then you feel maybe guilty or shame, or you don't know why you're not, and everybody is around you. So to normalize that, I would say every pregnancy after loss mom I know has experienced some level of, whether it be anxiety or depression or just feeling confused and like, I want to be excited, but I don't actually feel that way, right? And so just being able to, like you said, have understanding that this is quite normal for people who've experienced that. And if you don't have anybody in your circle who has, it's hard to feel that that's okay, right? I always say in the groups, we host a lot of pregnancy after loss groups. And I do believe that like you can let a pregnancy after loss rob you of every joy. You can, right? Like you can be so fearful and so stuck. Or I do believe you can choose moments of joy, right? Are you going to have as many as you did before? Probably not. But I always say lean into those moments because sometimes they are fewer and far between because of your experience. But you getting excited about buying the onesie doesn't cause the loss, right? We like go in our head and sometimes think that, right? We think if I get excited, then if the loss does happen again, it's going to hurt less. It's still going to hurt probably the same. But unlogically, we explain to ourselves, like, if I just don't get excited, then then it won't hurt. And so it's a fine balance, like you said, of just being able to validate how you feel, understand how you feel, and then also, try to not let that entire 9 months or whatever that time be all doom and gloom too. So it's great to have people who have journeyed it alongside of you, whether that's through words, books, or, peers in our group. But I appreciate you giving a voice to that.
Yeah, and I also want to say, just to kind of add on to that, so we talk about grief from pregnancy loss and how that often follows you into a pregnancy after loss. But I think there's also grief solely in relation to the next pregnancy. Grief over this isn't the pregnancy that this isn't the ideal pregnancy, maybe, or this isn't how I imagine my pregnancy to be, or pregnancy shouldn't be tainted with grief. And so those two different types of grief really come together in pregnancy after loss. But I also do, kind of like you were saying, when you wake up in the morning and you're still pregnant, I mean, these are things that we kind of have to actively tell ourselves, like,
Right.
I know that I am pregnant right now, and I might not know anything else, but I know that. I know that I'm carrying my baby. I know that I love my baby. And so it really is picking out those tiny moments and just really internalizing
Right.
the gift in those moments.
Right. I think another one some of our moms like is, every pregnancy is different, right? You can tend to go back to like, this is going to happen again, or this is just like that. But just like every child, every baby, every pregnancy is different too. And trying to remember those truths in those moments that feel so uncertain is powerful. And I know a lot of our moms hold on to a lot of those things that you just mentioned.
What was it like kind of reflecting back on your experience and reliving some of that experience as you were writing that book? I think we see this beautiful, hard soft cover, beautifully designed display on the table, and it seems like, oh, it just magically appeared, this really helpful resource for us. But writing a book is not an easy project at all, and let alone when it's coming truly from like the depths of your soul and your heart, and so just I'd love for you to share, if you don't mind, just really what that process was like as you were really leaning into your truth and your story in hopes of helping other people. What was that like?
I would say that it was healing for me. I mean, there were times as I was writing that I would get really sad or that I would cry. Just really reading the words and kind of reliving the experience. And I'm trying to think so I would have been maybe 4 years out when I started writing the book. And then the publishing process is a long process, so we don't need to get into that. So I was a few years removed, which I think was helpful. But so that it was interesting to go back, and it was kind of hard to go back because I was actively parenting a young child. My son was young at that time, and I was sort of in a different season. So it was hard, but also I hope that I took care. I mean, it's very much my story, and so I hope that it doesn't make assumptions when people are reading it as to their stories, or I hope there aren't things in there that are insensitive to other people's stories. And so I struggled with that because I didn't want something I said to be hurtful to other people. And so there was kind of a balance between my story, the emotions in my story, and how that might be perceived by other people who have similar stories, but maybe perceive things or experience things differently than me.
I love that you kind of mentioned just a little bit in that comparison of just experiences, and in our group spaces a lot, I say show up authentically as you, right? Like that's important, and inclusivity, like those are two huge values. But that might mean somebody's talking about their story and that might be hard for you to hear. It might be a piece that's triggering for you, or, there can be a lot of things in that. And I'm just try to really create a safe space, to your point, that like what I might say might not resonate with you, but maybe another mom's does resonate, or maybe there is an idea you like that you hear from somebody else, how they celebrate their baby. Maybe another one doesn't, right? Our experiences can be unique, but just like every baby, like none of it is exactly the same. And so hopefully, I'm sure that your words speak, I think, to a larger crowd that resonate beautifully with hopefully everybody who picks it up, right? That even if there's a moment that doesn't speak directly, that overall what you've conveyed, that message is beautiful and very much needed. And to your point, hidden, right? Not talked about. There isn't a really great space for it. So I connected through books and words in my own loss 12 years ago. I was a book junkie. I couldn't get enough of them because I didn't know anybody. So that was the way I connected, was reading book after book. I was sad. I wanted to kind of feel sad. Like that was how I handled my grief. I still lived. I got up and went to work. I lived and grieved, as David Kessler would say, is healthy. But for me, books were that voice initially when I didn't have community. Now I have that. That quickly came a part of my life. But before that, the first thing I could get my hands on to feel connection was a book of somebody else who had experienced it. So, even if not every word is perfectly spoken to somebody, I'm sure it resonates with those who hold it in their hands and read it.
Yeah, I mean, stories for all of time have been, I mean,
Mhm.
since the beginning of humanity, have been really what connect us the most, right? Back to caveman days when they carve their little pictures into the walls. I mean, that's how we've learned everything we know. And I think that's how we feel part of something. And so I think we're just all grateful that you had the courage to share your story. You know, that's our mission, is to help every family feel empowered to share their story. And it helps, if it helps one other person feel less alone, I think that is worth it,
Mhm.
right? That's worth every part of the hard,
Mhm.
I think.
I would love to know. So you talked, obviously, thank you for sharing your stories. And did you name your babies? I didn't.
So our 20-week loss, yeah, we named Micah, and I did not name our ectopic.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah,
which is, I mean, everybody has their own unique
yeah,
take on how they do that. But I might have if it had happened
yeah.
at a different time in my life.
I
It
always say
didn't
it's never too late,
feel
but yes,
well, which is true. Which is
in
true.
no judgment. No, I
Yes.
just curious.
No.
Wanted
No.
to make sure to honor that
Yeah.
appropriately,
Yes.
and how you do, right? I always say that there's no judgment of grief, and we see people come to groups years after their loss. I just got done talking to a mom who's 10 years out from actually an ectopic pregnancy. That at the time she said, I messaged my friends and said, I'm not pregnant anymore, and don't ever talk about it. She goes, they respected my wishes, and now it's 10 years, and she's saying to them, I do want to go back and honor this life. It did matter. Didn't have the support. So I do say it's never too late to change, to celebrate, or to name. But what I really wanted to know was, and you talk about this in some of your work, is kind of this comparison and just even where you are, maybe where you were then and maybe now, and how that's changed. A lot, unfortunately, of our moms have more than one loss, right? Or families have more than one loss. I'd love to say that it can't happen again, but we know that's not true. And so I think a lot of people struggle in their own stories of this comparison. And then there's this outside world and perception of comparison too, right? And just what that journey and experience has been for you, really personally comparing, but then how you've really created this beautiful message not to compare, and why, and just kind of where that all has come from for you and your personal experience.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to start, comparison isn't helpful at all to
Let's say that
anyone.
again. Right.
So it doesn't help you, and it doesn't help whoever you're comparing yourself to. But maybe I have a little bit of a unique perspective because I had a very early loss, and then I had a middle of my pregnancy loss. And so, I mean, it would be easy for me to look at a full term loss and say, that's much worse than mine. And it's terrible, absolutely terrible. But that doesn't diminish my grief. And so, just like my grief over a 20-week loss doesn't diminish someone else's grief over a 6-week loss. When I first started writing, and probably sometime after I published that piece, I don't know. But I would get messages saying, thank you for sharing your story. And I was only 6 weeks pregnant, or I was only 8 weeks pregnant, and I don't know why I feel so sad, and I feel like I shouldn't be grieving. And so it was hearing from other people really that made me think a little bit more about that. And because I would read those words and think, your grief is, you should be grieving. Like, that's a completely normal response, regardless of what gestation you were or how far along you were in your pregnancy. And so I actually think that the piece that you're referring to came from hearing from other
Mm,
people who felt
mm,
guilty about grieving an earlier loss. And I
mm,
just think, regardless, I mean, if you have two people who had a 10-week loss, their experiences are unique, just like
mm,
someone who had a 6-week loss and someone who had a 20-week loss. Those experiences are unique, and you can't quantify grief. Our
mm.
experiences, I mean, you don't know what else is going on in someone's life. You don't know what their pregnancy experience was like. You don't know, have they struggled with infertility? Have they had other losses? Do they have living children? Do they not have? I mean, there are so many factors. And so for
Mhm,
us to go around and try to um, define what someone else's grief should look
mm,
like, I mean, it just doesn't work that way. You can't
mhm.
define someone else's grief.
Or
You are not
quantify that.
living,
I
yes,
like
you
that.
cannot
Yeah, you can't
quantify it.
quantify. Agree.
Yes, and so I think we have an opportunity as women in this community or as families in this community to support each other instead of thinking to ourselves, I have it worse than you, or
Mm,
I don't have it as bad as someone else and I should just be
mm,
grateful. So, I mean, those
mhm,
are kind of the two extremes. I think we can all acknowledge our grief. I think we can all say our grief is valid. We've had a terrible loss. Our pregnancies ended without a baby in our arms. And we can come around that idea and that experience and really just support each other in our grief and in a loss of a baby. That's a
mm,
terrible thing for anyone to go through, regardless of how it happened or how far along you were.
mhm. Beautiful words. I appreciate all of it.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, the story and examples you're sharing is my story. I don't have living children, and so it was almost a full decade before I could even actually acknowledge that I am a mom. The world didn't see me as one. Nobody treated me as one, and it wasn't until I was in a No Fit Too Small group that was the first time somebody was looking at me in the eye and called me a mom. And Allie pretty much had to drag me there, and I help.
Don't tell people
do
that's what
this
I
work.
do.
And that's pretty much her job. She just drags you to things, but you're grateful for it afterwards. But I'm actively working in this space and still didn't have the courage to see myself and give myself the grace that I deserved and call myself the title I deserve. And so I think that the words to me are what are so powerful. And as a professional marketer and communicator, I think there's something so permanent when we put our words to paper as well.
Mm.
It's an extra step in the storytelling, in my opinion. Like it's an extra commitment to our words, right? And so I think it's such a gift that not only are you speaking and being a voice, but you are putting it to paper, literally, in a sense that, like, for all of time, mothers and fathers can see themselves in those words and those stories, and you are continuing to give people permission to see themselves by making those words permanent. And I want to acknowledge how special that is to people who are grieving loss, because we talk a lot about sharing our stories, but there's something about the longevity of yours that I think is just going to really change the world. And we see that happening within our community, which is why we're so excited that you're here, because your words truly are changing our little world.
And I mean, like you said, just giving permission, right? I think that's so often what a lot of early loss moms, families that I've encountered, like, they just need somebody to give them permission, and then to feel validated and to be witnessed in their grief. And so when they haven't experienced it, we see that all the time in our community, is like, kind of, that's the first step, right? Of just being given permission to call themselves a mom, or to think that their grief matters, or that they can grieve, that this is sad, right? When a mom starts crying in our groups and says, I'm sorry, I try to stop them and say, like, don't say that, right? Like, you should have nothing to be sorry for. You're crying about something that is sad. Unfortunately, our world's kind of conditioned you to, like, box it up and move on. But again, just giving them permission and space. And so I agree, just the words you have, when we've shared them or read them, they're just really powerful and give a lot of permission to people you'll probably never even know that you impact in such a beautiful way.
Well, I'm so grateful for that. And I love how you mentioned it's a commitment on paper. I'm like, I think maybe that's an exercise we all need to work on, like a group exercise. And that applies too to people who are commenting online or sending messages online and sharing their stories in these little snippets. It's so powerful to see so many stories shared in just a comment thread. And all those people are connected through, that one post or that or the one story. And it's really powerful to be able to look at other people's stories, and for other people to be able to look at so many stories and connect with so many people who are like them. And it's a little bit of a commitment, even though it's on social media or the internet.
Doesn't matter where it's at.
Yeah.
I spent some time writing our story at our 10-year mark. So we just celebrated 12 years of celebrating our daughter this past weekend. And I spent a lot of time writing that. And what I realized at the 10-year mark, and I did a lot of journaling early on about our loss, and that was very private for the most part. But this 10-year one I wrote, and I spent a lot of time, and to your point, like, there were some emotions that, like, when I really sat with it, that came back, and things I remembered. But one of the things that surprised me is like I was trying to recall a detail and like, what did that nurse say? And what I finally, for me, had to land on, like, it didn't actually matter her exact words. It was how they made me feel, right? Like, I might have gotten the words wrong. It's 10 years ago. There's certain things I can remember like this. And then as I thought about it, and I even asked my husband, and then he said something, I'm like, well, definitely wasn't that. But it was this idea that, like, it wasn't so much the specifics of it, but it was how it made me feel in that moment and what I was trying to convey. And I think you do a beautiful job of how do I want people to feel reading this, right? Like, you just feel so validated. You feel so included. I think you do a beautiful job of conveying like how you want somebody else to feel, which is, I think, the most important part, or can be an important part. Pretty.
You talk a lot about connection, and, you know, obviously a pillar of our mission here is unite families. Our ultimate goal is to build a community. And so I want to hear, I mean, you had this amazing experience where your words literally went viral. What has it been like watching your words essentially build a community online? What has that felt like?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. Well, I will say it was very overwhelming. Um, you know, when you have that kind of reach, I remember that post very vividly, and just so many comments, just thank you, thank you, thank you, and sharing of other stories. I felt really grateful. I felt very grateful, not only um, that so many people could relate, but just that so many people felt seen. And it was as if for many of them, this was something that they had never considered before, or like no one had ever brought to their attention before, that your 6 week loss matters. It's okay to
Mhm.
cry. You like that's normal. So I mean, I'm grateful. I guess I'll just leave it at that. I'm grateful that so many people were able to connect with that and connect with each other through that,
Mhm.
and feel like they had permission to grieve, and that there was nothing wrong with them, and that their baby deserved that
Mm.
recognition.
Absolutely. Do you remember the first time you felt seen after your loss?
Oh my gosh. That's a hard question. The grief fog is
Mm.
is and was
Is
very
real.
real. So I feel like I can remember the depths of grief, and I can remember how terrible it was, but I think there's a lot of missing pieces. I will say this wasn't immediately after. Gosh, I'm going to think about that after we're done, because it might take me a while to really answer that. But on the 1 year anniversary of losing Micah, a bouquet of flowers showed up at my doorstep, that I wasn't expecting and that no one had told me was coming. And that was very powerful. I did feel that someone remembered that that was the day 1 year prior that we had lost Micah. And what made that even more powerful is that they came from a friend of mine, but she was actually in the hospital and had just had a baby who was in the
Oh.
NICU. And
Mm.
so just that she was going through this whole scenario, like a big deal in her life. She wasn't even home and was dealing with, a sweet little kiddo, who couldn't come home from the hospital yet, and that she thought to send me flowers, on that day, and that she remembered that date. Now, maybe
Mm.
she put it in her calendar, which I totally recommend doing, for your loved ones who
Nothing
have
wrong
lost
with
a
that.
baby. Yep, but I will say I felt very seen. Like, that is one time that stands out to me, just in this moment, that I can remember that I felt just seen and loved. Like, wow, okay, someone else gets it. Even though she had never experienced loss,
Mhm.
I was very moved by that.
Yeah, what I love about that is there's actually no words, no words
Yeah,
spoken, right?
right.
Just such a simple gesture, a common gesture, just timed with such
Yeah.
intentionality that it meant more. And, you know, oftentimes we find people who haven't experienced loss don't know what to do
Hmm.
when their loved one experiences loss. And so, what a beautiful example, what an easy example of a way you can show up. And you don't have to have the right words. You don't have to have the pressure to have the right words or say the right thing. It's just, you know, the meaning behind that. So I love that
Yeah.
you shared that, and that was so meaningful for you to just have a friend, you know, show up for you that way.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of on that note, I think people, like you said, like we think there has to be a grand gesture or we have to have perfect words, but just a simple text, I'm thinking of you,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm thinking of you today, like on this
Mm-hmm.
day, if that's an anniversary date, or just a check in. How are you doing? It does not have to be anything big or grand. It can just be very simple of it, just to know someone is thinking of you and that what you're going through is important enough for them to check in about. That's huge. Just that one small thing is huge.
I have to ask kind of a question that's been fresh on my mind in the past few years. As you've gotten out further from that anniversary date, do you find less people reaching out, and or how that does that make you feel over time? We have a lot of moms. I mean, families find us at all different times, right? Like, but a lot are pretty fresh out of their losses. And I think it's every family's fear, right? Will my baby be forgotten, right? And like not wanting that. And so, but tend to over time maybe hear from less and less people. I think especially on those dates, and just if that's happened to you, and how you've maybe navigated or how you've handled that, or if that impacts you.
I would say over the last couple years, maybe I haven't heard anything on that day. So I'm 10
Mhm.
years out. So we lost Micah in 2015. Um, but up until then, up until the last couple of years, I would get a couple texts,
Mhm.
usually, maybe a card. And then as time has gone on, there have been a number of friends who experienced loss in that
Mhm.
time. And so over the past several years, those are typically the ones that I've heard from because, I mean, I'm guessing anyway, not only because we're friends and they love me, but because now they've been
They
able
get
to
it.
really relate to that experience.
Mhm. Sure.
And I wouldn't say, again, very personal. Everyone
Yeah.
processes these things differently. I wouldn't say that, these last couple years of that dropping off have been super impactful for me. I think in the first few years, I learned a lot about grace, and just a
Mhm.
lot about life and being able to give grace to people who are living their own crazy lives and their own chaos, and their
Mhm.
own hard things. And so that's not to say that none of us should be reaching out or we shouldn't care about other people. But I think I've been able to kind of see life through a different lens of when you're in your own grief, it's very consuming, and
Mhm.
that's your life.
Mhm.
When, in those intense first months, year, whatever that might look like for you personally. But while you're going through that, our loved ones are also often going
Mhm.
through really hard things too. And so that's something that, just I think has come with time,
Sure.
learning just to kind of give people grace and living their own hard lives.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's a good answer or not.
It's your truth. It's not a wrong answer.
Yeah.
I mean, 12 years out, so I feel similar in that I don't hear from as many, and it doesn't necessarily bother me in a certain way. And sometimes in some ways, the few I do just really strike a chord, right? Feel like, again, not seeking or looking for it, but those few might be, like you said, somebody else who's now experienced it, who maybe wasn't even a part of my life 12 years ago. And so I think it's just kind of an evolution that happens, like you said, also kind of where you're at and what you need. And again, everybody's different. Some people, it's like you need to tell friends, like, hey, it means a lot when you reach out on that day. Please
Yeah.
keep doing that, or don't stop, right? Just also using our voices to communicate that need to our close friends and family, if that's something. So I was just kind of curious.
Yeah. Well, and I think I can also say that as time has gone on, it has become a little bit less about my story and a little bit more about other people's stories.
Hmm.
So I feel like my personal story has sort of transitioned to other people's stories, and I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
I've said what I need to say. I've said what I wanted to say. I've connected with a ton of different people and continue to do that. And so now it
Hmm.
kind of feels like it's more about the people I'm connecting with or have
Hmm.
connected with, over these past 10 years, or
Yeah.
will connect with. Um, it's
Yeah.
bigger
Kind of like
than
a
me.
ripple.
It's bigger
Yeah.
than me is maybe
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
get
it
it.
feels like we all kind of become part of this collective story, right? Not to diminish our own unique
Hmm.
stories in that, but we do kind of become part of a movement together the more we use our voices and advocate for, awareness and change in whatever that looks like. But I don't want to call Allie out, but she always shares the story about how early after her loss, she, felt like she didn't have the words to really share her story. And that she remembers vividly the first time that somebody really used the words that resonated with her, that felt true for her. And I imagine we have many people listening who feel that way, who feel almost like they've forgotten language, right? And we just don't know what words to use. So you are a seasoned, beautiful writer. Those of us who are not professional writers and maybe don't have experience sharing our story, what advice would you have for the person who maybe is going to share their story for the first time or journal for the first time? Do you have any tips or advice?
Gosh. Well, I'm a huge advocate of journaling. I'll say that. I did that for a long time after we lost Micah. I've always been a journaler, but that was one way for me to get it out. And I need to be clear, I am not, at least prior to pregnancy loss, I was not a vulnerable person. I'm not a great speaker. I can write pretty well, but when it comes to verbal speaking, not so great.
You're doing us. You're fooling us.
You're doing great.
So I used that journal about Micah to communicate with my husband. Like it felt too hard to speak the words. And so I would write whatever I needed to write. And then I kept that journal, on the dresser or somewhere. And I told him, if you want to know what's going on, read this journal. Like it's for both of us, but this is for you, because I didn't have the words. I didn't have the words at that time. So huge advocate of journaling. I think telling your story is very personal. I feel like, and this might be that my world's a little colored because I am in the pregnancy loss space, in a variety of different places. And so I feel like people really want to tell their stories, and that's not the case for everyone. I wasn't ready to do it. I couldn't even talk to my husband about it. So that wasn't my story in the beginning, but I'm hoping that people just feel like they have the permission to do that. But also you have to know the people that that you have access to. Maybe that's an internet community that feels really safe. The pregnancy loss support groups that are on Facebook and places like that were very helpful to me. And those are safe places for you to tell your story. Maybe you have, I'm just throwing this out there, this is not my case, but maybe you have a sister-in-law or something who isn't super empathetic, who isn't someone you're really close with. That might not be the person to share your story with. And so I think choose wisely if you want to tell your story, if it's something that you want to get out, that you feel is important. I personally feel like it's important. And then so I'm giving you permission to do that. Find a place where it's going to be heard and received with care.
I love that because Jackie, you were talking about, went back to kind of early times and right after our loss, you were talking about grief fog too. And I felt that, but I remember very clearly a couple, like in those first few months, wanting to share our story, like verbally, like with a cousin, with, some dear friends. And I think because there wasn't a story of life, like I didn't know how to tell it, right? Like it was a story really of pregnancy loss was the story at that time. Now I can, 12 years later, say a lot more about this story. But at that time, that was kind of all I had. And I was like, well, who wants to hear that story, right? I needed to out loud talk about it. Like I remember that feeling, but not knowing like where to really start. I wish I had the courage at the time because I had the people. I just needed to like kind of trust that they weren't going to be able to validate with their own stories, but they would have listened. And that would have been more healing for me. But like also Jackie had mentioned, it also was people having those words so that finally when I was able to like share stuff, I had heard other people say what my heart wanted to that I couldn't verbalize. As somebody who likes to talk, an out loud processor, I needed to hear it first from somebody else to be able to kind of put words to how I really felt. And that was a powerful piece to being able to tell my story. And so, like you said, there's no kind of perfect time, but also giving space to, like you said, journaling to your husband. I love that idea. Like, especially early on when you're trying to both navigate so much heavy grief and trying to process what has happened, what is happening, giving space to grieving differently, right? And so what a great example that I think could work be a great tool for so many people too, and not being worried about what comes out, right? Like you said, that was your safe place to be vulnerable and to be able to share how you felt, which I think is important, whether you're writing, speaking. How are you getting that out, right? Like you probably do want to, and I think that is healthy, whether that's with a therapist, wherever. But having that opportunity and feeling encouraged, empowered, or given options to do that is important. So I love that example.
Kind of from the other side, I think our loved ones, friends, family, whoever feel like they're intruding if they ask
Mm-hmm.
questions. I mean, even something as simple as "How are you doing?" and because they're afraid that they're going to open up tears or open up sadness for
Mm-hmm.
you, which you're already crying and sad. So I think, kind of from the other side, some good advice for the loved ones of someone who has lost a baby is don't be afraid to ask the hard questions, because that gives the person who's grieving, again, gives them permission to speak. Because
Mm-hmm.
we do tend to think nobody wants to hear my sad story, that,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be a downer, those kinds of
Mm-hmm.
thoughts. And so it's helpful if someone asks you a
Mm-hmm.
question and you can choose to answer it or not.
Right.
There's no pressure to answer it, but it kind of gives an opening for the people who
Mm-hmm.
want to talk about it to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. I
Yeah,
think
that's
that
great advice.
invitation is always important, even in our moms groups and spaces. Early on, when I first led them, and we still like nobody has to share. I say it's always, if you want to share today, anything, a word, a sentence, a lot, whatever is welcomed, and a goal, but it isn't necessary, and it doesn't mean you can't feel supported without sharing anything. But one of the things I started to do is towards the end of the group is if somebody hasn't shared, is to call them out in a beautiful way, to invite them to share, because it's often then that like I realized they can always say no, pass, shake their head, and they don't even have to like verbalize, but it's always an invitation that sometimes we're just waiting for, right? Like I'm scared, my voice is gonna shake when I speak, I'm gonna cry, I don't know how this is gonna sound, it's not a pretty wrapped up conversation with a bow, but sometimes it's just that invitation, whether it's in our group spaces or it's a dear loved one, to just say like, do you want to talk about this today? I'm just giving you that space, that doesn't say, wrap it up in 10 minutes or it's only a few, like just really giving you that space is such a gift. So I think that is a great message to loved ones who often feel fearful about making us cry again when we already are, like that can be really helpful. And the worst thing that somebody's going to say is, nope, I don't want it today. Right. And then you move on, but you've given that space, and that's such a gift that we can continue to give to each other in that.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're talking a lot about creating these safe spaces to have these conversations, but we all know the reality is, especially the internet, is not always a safe space, right? And we've experienced this as an organization. There's so much stigma around pregnancy and infant loss. It's the whole purpose of this podcast, is to help reduce that and hold space for the tough conversations. And, I love that your words have received such positive response from so many families, feeling courageous enough to say me too in response. But I want to ask you kind of the tough question on the flip side of that, as somebody who's had the experience of reaching many, many people with this message who may not be as comfortable talking about it. Have you received negative feedback or negative comments at all? And how do you combat that or respond to that if you have?
Well, how I combat that is by blocking people.
Boundaries are okay.
Love it. I love it.
I'm not going to fight with people online. So, I mean, really, truly, that's how I combat that, is block and delete.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't say, I mean, typically, I haven't had a lot of that though. So typically responses have been positive. I have gotten a lot of responses and messages over the years from women who are older than me, from previous generations, in which they didn't feel like they could talk
Mm-hmm.
about, their miscarriage or their stillbirth. And they have come online and are talking about it there. Um, and so I hope, like I said, my world might be a little bit colored, because I'm in these spaces so much. I feel like there are a lot of safe spaces, which I'm grateful for. Um, Now, this would be pre-writing, um, coming into contact with people who just don't really know, or don't, they don't have the words, but when they do speak, you almost wish maybe they wouldn't have said anything.
comes out a little sideways.
I think that those are some things that I hung on to early on, just like anger or resentment. That over time, again, I've learned to let go. I've learned to give some grace there. I've learned to focus on the statements or the communications that are true. I've learned to focus on the, gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Just the support, I guess. And so, I mean, there truly are things that you just have to let go. And it takes time. I'm not saying that that's easy. I'm 10 years out. So I've had some time to let things go. Again, I think it comes back to finding your community,
Your community.
and you're one of them, a supportive community.
I completely get that. I say often some of those, comments that came out, a little off, that people tried. I said their intent was good. The impact, was a little shaky, but they were trying to say something in a space where you can't say the right thing. Nothing brings our babies back, right? And so to your point early on, like some of that really stung and that really hurt, and it was hard. It was a struggle, especially depending on how close you were to somebody, a lot of different factors. But having a safe place for me has helped me let go, right? Like those things don't hurt because they just don't know, right? Like to your point of grace, like I can't expect somebody who doesn't get it to ever get it. We can teach them compassion and we can teach them things to say and not say, but they're never going to get it to the level, and this is true of any hardship you're in, nobody's going to get it like those who have experienced it. So having that safe place has truly, when I say let go, like I now laugh about those things that come out really bad because it's just like they just don't know. But again, that's taken a lot of time and a safe place that when I was angry or sad, I could say that in community that got it. This doesn't mean I don't like that person, but this really hurt when they said this, right? And somebody else to say, I've experienced that too. Or here's actually how I've helped that situation, instead of for me just to like run from it. Sometimes I just need to say it and be done with it. Sometimes I needed to hear somebody say, well, when my mother-in-law says X, this is how I respond, right? And I'm not saying that was my story, but, in-laws, families that we're really close with, and we want and we seek that from them, and they sometimes can't provide in what we thought they could give us. A community who gets it can do that. And so, like you said, just finding whatever safe place that is, I think is so important.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point there too. It's not done with ill intent. People,
Right.
I mean, in general, they don't say things maliciously.
Right.
They say things that they hope will be helpful, probably, or they're just nervous, and then they say something that is stupid.
And we've all been there, right? We've all said one of those things.
Yeah, I was going to say we're all guilty of it.
It's our life experiences that change us, right? So
Yep.
know better, do better. Until then, people are trying their best.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I love that we're kind of hovering on community and find your tribe, right? We set the tone in our community with your words. So this is our tradition, and we host 106 groups this year, I think is what we have on the calendar.
Which is ironic because it's like almost 1 in 4 days there's a group. Some days there's 2 groups. But with the statistic of 1 in 4 experiencing loss, it wasn't planned that way. But when I did all the math, I was like, that's kind of uniquely special for our community as we've just grown and added more support. So that includes both our men's social clubs, so guys, a space for dads, our moms groups, and both in person and virtual. So options in person all around the state of Iowa, and now outside in Nebraska, and virtually really for somebody anywhere. So yes, we've been using these words for, I can't remember exactly how long, but long enough that many, many families have really hung and clung to.
Yeah, well, I know I speak from experience. When I first walked in, I think I mentioned earlier, I didn't know if I belonged there. And so when Allie read your quote and helped me understand that, an early loss is just as much a loss as anybody else's loss, it just kind of changed everything for me. So the special gift we wanted to give to our community today was we were hoping you might feel comfortable reading those words to our families. They hear it from Allie all the time. And I just think there's something different about them coming from, the heart that wrote them. So if you'd be willing, we would love to just hear you read that to us.
Sure. Yeah. I believe it doesn't have a title, what I'm looking at, but I believe I titled it A Mother's Love is Not Measured in Weeks. And it was originally published in 2018. So here we go. When women discover that I lost a baby during the 20th week of pregnancy, they will often open up to me about their own loss experience. If it occurred earlier in their pregnancies, they tend to reduce its significance by saying they were only 6 weeks, 8 weeks, or fill in the blank weeks pregnant when their loss occurred. They usually follow up that only statement by saying something along the lines of how their loss doesn't compare to mine, or how they can't imagine losing a baby after the first trimester of pregnancy. And I guess I've said or thought some variation of the same thing. When discussing my early loss versus my later loss, I've reduced it to being nothing more than a medical mishap that occurred when I was only 6 weeks pregnant. I guess sometimes it's just easier that way. And when hearing of someone else's full term loss, I've considered how much worse it might have been to lose my baby at 40 weeks instead of only 20 weeks. But that's where the problem lies. It's in the comparison. It's in thinking that one pregnancy, one life, is more significant than another based on its duration. It's in thinking that the loss of a baby who is too small to be seen or held is less significant than the baby who is big enough for a crib but was laid in a casket instead. The truth is that my losses are no more or less significant than anyone else's. Each loss experience is unique, to be sure. My two were. But no matter if we're talking about an early loss or a late loss, I've missed out on the same things as every other lost mom. I've missed a lifetime of getting to know two of my children. I've missed milestones and celebrations. I've missed the mundane moments that would have made up the majority of memories with the two babies who didn't come home with me. I don't know the details of anyone else's loss, nor can I say I know exactly how they were affected by it. The experiences of lost moms are never exactly the same. But I do know that there is no only in pregnancy loss, not in mine or anyone else's. There is already. There was a pregnancy that had already progressed to 6 or 8 or 20 weeks along. There was already life as evidenced by two pink lines, the same pink lines that had already alerted a woman to her role as mother. There was already the sound of a heartbeat, whether it beat for a day, a month, or longer. There was already a connection between mother and baby, and there was already love planted deeply in a mother's heart, a love that had already begun to grow from the moment the first sign of life was displayed in the once empty window of a pregnancy test. It doesn't matter if a pregnancy only lasted for a few weeks. It doesn't matter if it was an early loss or a late loss. What matters is that there was already a baby who was loved immensely, and love cannot be measured in weeks.
Beautiful. I think Jackie and I are both sitting here with tears. And usually when I read it to the group is sitting there with tears. So no matter how many times, moms will often say, like, it doesn't matter. Every time it gets to me, right? And thank you for giving words that are inclusive. And so that was the whole point of ever reading it, is that for so long, a mom would come and it would get to her turn and she would say, I'm not sure I belong here. And that was the last thing I would want somebody to sit through an entire hour or 2 hours and think, no story sounds like mine. Mine can't matter. Often based on gestation and weeks, right? A lot of it had to do with that. And so it's just so lovely to set the tone that when it gets to anybody's turn to share, nobody says anymore, I'm not sure I belong, because I think those words have validated that every loss matters. Everybody is included at this table. And I always say we can read it and say we're inclusive, but if you don't act that way, it doesn't matter. But the way our community supports like that is just incredible. But I think it does take you know, like you said, creating this community and setting this tone that every loss matters here. And once we can kind of cut the white noise of the world comparing, because they still do, we leave that space. And unfortunately, I know we still hear some of those things, but in that space, the mom who had a full-term stillbirth, validating the mom that was this early loss, who has been seeking that, just happens so beautifully, right? And to your point, the mundane moments or all those milestones, those are all the same things we all miss, right? Those don't matter in gestational ages. So thank you very much for giving those words for me as a leader and facilitator, to wanting to say all are welcome here in a way that was really powerful and really spoke to every mom who's ever attended, I think, our groups. Thank you for those words.
Well, thank you so much for sharing them. I'm really grateful that they've reached so many.
Yes, from did you say 2018?
Yeah.
Is that right? Yes, I think they will go on indefinitely. And I can't tell you how many times people afterward, can you share those words to me? And, so linking it up to your website and sharing where they originated from, because I think it's something that they want to go on and share too with their community. Like, this did matter, and these are better words than maybe I had themselves. So just this ripple effect that those words have had are incredible to witness.
And I haven't had to use the tissues yet, so you're my first where they've progressively moved closer to me in each of these episodes, but I haven't pulled the trigger and pulled one out yet. So I've caved now. It's like I broke the tear seal and there's no going back. So yeah, there's just something, it just hits really hard every time we read that. And, I know people could write so many different things that would pull at our heartstrings, but I think there's something really special about the way that you've shared your truth with the world that I just hope you realize is helping us further our mission to literally change the conversation and change the narrative and ultimately, hopefully, change the world and the way that we see pregnancy and infant loss. And so
we say often, we have our 3 pillars to celebrate angels, unite families, and build birthing and bereavement suites. It was nothing ever we set out to do, but because of our losses, we felt compelled. But while those pillars are important, we say if we do nothing else than change the dialogue around pregnancy and infant loss, then we will have won, right? Like, that is the ultimate goal that will change all those other things, right? That will find community, that will change the standard of care. Like, all of those other things are going to keep happening, and we'll keep doing those things. But it is truly this dialogue that I believe is changing and through everybody sharing their stories. So thank you for sharing your story as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we all know, really why we're so passionate about this is we call them our angels, our babies. And so I love to ask all of our guests, I hope you don't mind, if you could say something to your angels today, what would that be?
I would tell them that they have changed my life, even though they did not make it into my arms. And that's pretty wild.
Now I need a tissue.
Yeah. I know. Oh man.
They've changed all of us.
Yeah, they have. Yeah. We're so grateful for the work they're doing through you too. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you for the work you guys are doing. I'm just so grateful that you've given me this opportunity to talk with you, but that you have also used something that I've written to reach so many, and in person too, face to face. That's a real gift.
So hopefully we can do that with you soon too. So you're not too far away.
I'm not. No, I'm not.
We'll make that happen.
Yeah.
So where can our listeners find more information about you and your book and get connected into, the community that you're kind of building online?
Sure. Well, the Courageously Expecting community is at Courageously Expecting, and that's both on Instagram and Facebook. And then my website is jennyalbers.com.
Okay. Any future big writing projects or books the work?
Not at this time. I'm going to graduate school, so I'm doing a lot of writing there. But that's it for now, just academic writing, and we'll see what happens after that. Yeah.
Well, good for you. Let us know so we can celebrate.
Keep in touch.
Yeah. Sure. Definitely.
Thank you, Jenny. We're really grateful for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the No Foot Too Small podcast. If you're a family navigating pregnancy or infant loss, we would love to connect with you. Please reach out to us at our website, nofoottosmall.org. And if you want to learn more about Jenny and her book, we'll include all of her information in the show notes of this episode. Special shout out to Storyline Multimedia for helping us hold space for these important conversations. And we'll catch you at the next episode.